It is week 10, and that means here on Inside the Zone with Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance Sports, we are talking the second season as sectionals kick off for 4A through 1A this coming Friday. And Justin, before we break down the sectionals that are going to be playing this Friday, going into the playoffs, I was thinking about this before the show. If you had to pick one or two teams from our area that might make a run to Indianapolis at this point, who would be on your short list?
For everything we know right now, I would go Adams Central as one, and I would go. Ooh, man, that's tough. You know what? I would go Leo.
Really?
I mean, I know East Snowball's beaten them. I know Columbia City's beaten them. They were both close games. I think Leo is led by a really good senior class. I think they have the revenge on their mind. I know it's going to be incredibly difficult to get out of that sectional, but that would be the other team in the area that I would look at and say, yes, you are capable of making a big run.
I was going to go Adams Central 1, Garrett 2, and East Noble as my 3. I don't know enough
Yeah.
about, I haven't researched 3A enough, but I feel like Garrett has all the pieces working and they've got kind of that special thing, that special sauce going, which can't be discounted.
Right.
But I like the Leo selection because there is no substitute for experience in the postseason. And with last year's run, they do have that along with some top end talent.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the thing with Garrett is we talk so much about their senior class and Cameron Rubel and guys like that, but there's only 10 or 11 seniors on that team. There's a lot of youth on that team. Braden Nussbaum, guys like that, Guzman. I mean, it's still a young group. So, they're perfectly capable of making a run too. I just look at that and say, man, they got some youth and some key experience or key spots. They're going to have to really, really come through throughout the next month or so.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit about Leo and East Noble. They're two major competitors for a sectional 19, maybe the best sectional, 8-team sectional in our area. So we're going to start there. You've got Southside at East Noble, Leo at DeKalb, Columbia City at Dwenger, New Haven at Wayne. Columbia City Dwenger is going to be our highlight zone game of the week. You're talking about a Columbia City team that's only loss is to East Noble in Kendallville. They picked up a win against Leo. They're scoring the ball 44 points a game, third best in the state in 4A. Against Dwenger, who's a perennial power, who they look good against Concordia last week, so they do go into the postseason with some momentum. And we know what Bishop Dwenger's capable of when it comes to the postseason and flipping that switch.
We do, and I thought it was very encouraging what we saw at Bishop Dwenger last week. I know it was Concordia and a team they should beat anyway, but the way that offense was able to operate, and when you're a team that really struggles offensively, even against a team that you should dominate, of which Concordia was, it can really build some momentum and positive vibes around the program, particularly that offense making some plays, right? So even though you were supposed to do that to Concordia, the fact that you haven't had much offensive success through most of the season can really help having a game like that, especially going into a game where you're really going to have to execute. And you feel like, okay, Dwenger maybe defensively can get the stops to keep this game within striking distance. Can the offense make the plays? After last week, it's much easier to go into a game like this, having the momentum you built from that Concordia game.
And for Columbia City, is it just kind of a case of you go out and try to outscore everybody? Like, is that what you're going to do? Because you have a lot of offensive weapons. They've been able to do it outside of the East Noble game. It was a close game with Leo, not necessarily a high scoring game. They've been able to play their game, score early, and control the flow of the game throughout the course of the season. That's kind of been their MO. Score early, score often.
Score early, score often, and really use the offense to set everything else up, or use the running game to set everything else up. Excuse me. And we've seen that throughout the season, and even in the wins, the win over Leo, we saw the running game set the tone. And maybe that's the biggest matchup in this game is Columbia City's running game against that Bishop Dwenger defense. If Columbia City can have success moving the chains with its running game, it's going to be very difficult for Bishop Dwenger to win this football game. But conversely, if Bishop Dwenger can command the point of attack and really bottle up that running game and force Grayson Bradbury to make some throws, then I think that plays into Bishop Dwenger's hands. So I feel like this matchup could be decided based on how well that Bishop Dwenger defense does or does not bottle up that Columbia City running game.
On the top half of the bracket, the Southside at East Noble game and the Leo at DeKalb game. Leo DeKalb is a rematch of what we saw in Week 9. That was 48-7 Leo. Is there any way DeKalb flips the script in this week? Because they've been solid, maybe not spectacular all season long, but they've been solid all season long, aside from that Leo game. And Caden Hinkle, they can really run the football. And in the postseason, if you control the clock and keep the ball out of Escaria and Brock Schott and Landon Hepner's hands, you have a much better chance. And they can run the ball.
They can. Unfortunately, they didn't have much success doing it last week against Leo. So unless they can find a way to open up some holes and get Caden Hinkle some yardage and getting him into space and picking up yards, then DeKalb has no shot in this game. So the rematch, I think you're just going to see DeKalb do some different things to try to take advantage of maybe some opportunities. But that's kind of why I looked at Leo as maybe that team that could make a run, because it just feels like it has a chip on its shoulder. And to be honest, DeKalb is kind of the first victim.
When you take a look at that New Haven Wayne game, we talked about this at the beginning of the season. We talked about it at the beginning of last season. We're just kind of waiting for Sherwood Haydock to take the next step with that Wayne program. They played Snyder 21-8 last week. Kamar Nelson's out. He's going to be questionable with the groin injury for this game. Can Wayne be a team that puts together a run here in the postseason? Because we've just kind of been waiting for it in the regular season the last couple of years as Haydock has built that program.
It's definitely a team that nobody wanted to draw in that sectional, particularly none of the NE8 schools. They did not want to see Wayne first. And it was puzzling what we saw in week 8 with Wayne losing by 30 to Northside. They played better last week against Snyder. And as you mentioned, Kamar Nelson not on the field for them. The expectations is that he will be back this Friday, hopefully, for Wayne Generals fans. But they get a definitely good draw because New Haven just is kind of after the, they were very competitive for the majority of the season. And it's just these last couple of weeks, it just seems like almost like they're just trying to get to the end of what has been an emotional season and a tough season. It was already going to be a rebuilding year. Then you lose your head coach, and they've done a good job. Coach Shearer's done a good job. It just feels like a team that's kind of ready to be done this year and move on. And it's a good draw for Wayne. And then if I'm Columbia City, if I'm East Noble, if I'm Leo, I don't want to see Wayne because you just don't know. I think the biggest thing for Wayne is if Harold Mack can make some plays behind center, whether it's running the ball, whether it's passing the ball, if he can be the dynamic athlete we know he is consistently for Wayne, they give him time to move and time to make plays. It's a very, very dangerous Wayne football team.
Speaking of dangerous teams, in 4A Sectional 20, Huntington North, we talk about teams that nobody wanted to draw Wayne. Huntington North, if you talk about the draw, they got it about as good as anybody in Northeast Indiana because they will take on a Frankfort team in the first round that hasn't won a game all season. And then a 5-4 Marion team that has had moments this season. We saw them in week 1, edge Southside here in Fort Wayne in overtime, but 5-4 on the season. And Huntington North, they scored 49 points last week, and they just keep scoring, and you just keep having to tip your hat to what Mike Eschbach has done, going from 1 win a year ago to 6 wins already this season, and possibly, most likely more.
This is a team, when you look at the draw in this sectional, you kind of draw them into that sectional championship game, right? If everything goes according to plan. And then if you get to the sectional championship game, you don't know what can happen. So it's been a tremendous year already for Huntington North in terms of being year 2. We seem to talk about them almost every week about what Mike Eschbach has been able to do with that program. But I think defensively, you look at that team is really, really improving over the course of the season. They've had some struggles here and there, but by and large, you're seeing the foundation of what could be a very, very competitive football team in the years to come. But instead of looking ahead, Huntington North's looking at the opportunity right in front of them, and the draw sets up very well for at least a couple more weeks of Vikings football in Huntington.
I know when we talk about quarterbacks in the area having a good year, I feel like we don't talk about Tony Decker, but every time we show highlights, I see Tony Decker chucking it to Tatum Brooks or somebody, and he looks pretty darn good. And then he'll run another one in, and I mean he's been a dynamic part of that offense this season. 3A sectional 26, Lakeland at Garrett, Woodland at Tippy Valley, West Noble Angola, Concordia Fairfield. Lakeland and Garrett is a rematch. It was our game of the week early in the season, back in week 4. But these are two teams that are seemingly on uh, different directions at this point of the season because Lakeland has lost 3 in a row, and Garrett just seems to be more invincible each week. How is this going to be different than week 4, or is it going to be different than week 4?
The problem that Lakeland had is they dug themselves such a tremendous hole against Garrett the first time around. It was kind of a 20-point lead before Lakeland even got on the board, and then the team started trading touchdowns in the second half. Problem was Lakeland couldn't stop Garrett, and that's been the problem for Lakeland in that game and recently. They can't get stops defensively. So we look at that offense with Braden Holbrook and Kean Arroyo in the running game and say that's a dangerous team to play offensively. But if they can't stop anybody, it doesn't really matter. So that's kind of the trouble with Lakeland in round 2 of this game. After round 1, we saw them not getting stops, and it looks like defensively they're struggling of late. Is can Lakeland find a way to really maybe force a couple turnovers, take Garrett out of its running game and force them into second longs, third longs, and make them uncomfortable? That's the goal. But man, it just doesn't seem like a Lakeland defense lately that's been able to get much of stops. I mean, we saw what Fairfield did to them last week.
And Woodland Tippy Valley, Woodland, the Adams Central game last week notwithstanding, has played pretty good football in the second half of the season. Tippecanoe Valley always comes in with a good record, and we're always like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. With the schedule they played and the team, they don't play a lot of teams in our area, but they always come up with a good record. And then it's at Tippecanoe Valley, Death Valley. It's a tough place to play. That could be intriguing as well. West Noble versus Angola. That was 35-10 back in week 4. And West Noble is kind of like Garrett. They just continue to look impressive week after week. But Concordia Fairfield is interesting to me, because you take a look at a team that's finishing in the bottom half of the SAC that went 2-7 against a Fairfield team that's playing its best football at this time of the season. Like, that could be, I know these are teams that are both under 500, but an interesting game to see where a team like Concordia at the bottom of the SAC this season is against a solid NECC team that's on the rise.
That's precisely why Concordia is advantageous. And Coach Manigault for years has said, just the benefits we have of playing up in the SAC. And now you have a couple non-conference games as well. But Concordia takes their lumps over the course of the season and then comes into a sectional where you say they should be playing like-minded foes and the same foes. The problem with Concordia is they just can't get stops defensively either. I mean, Andrews has been really solid throwing the ball, maybe throws a bit too many in terms of interceptions, but they've been able to move the ball offensively against teams that are like them. It's just they can't get stops. So that's another question with Concordia going on the road, taking on Fairfield, is can Concordia's defense get some stops, keep this game close, and maybe the Cadets can pull something out at the end.
You look at 3A sectional 28, Norwell Lures, Jay County versus Belmont, Heritage versus Delta, Oak Hill versus Mississinawa. The better records are on the bottom half of this bracket. But I want to touch on that Lures Norwell game because, we've all said it with Lures this season. If they can get something going offensively, they could be a dangerous team. Week in and week out, they've had trouble scoring the football later in the season. Now, I was there at Lewis Field Friday night, saw them score they had a couple of nice drives, second quarter, third quarter, to take the lead, but eventually lost to Homestead. How much juice does Lures have going in, and can they make a run here? Because Norwell might be the best team that they play until the sectional championship game.
And Lures was a winner with the sectional draw, no doubt, and they'll get Norwell at home coming up on Friday. It's just, Lures is one of those teams where you see the potential, whether they're warming up or on the sidelines. You see it sometimes, a play here, a series here on field, but it's just lacking that cohesiveness. We kind of knew this year was going to be a rebuilding year of sorts for Bishop Lures, but they'll always tell you, well, once we get into sectionals and beyond, everything's on the table. Well, traditionally that's in 2A. Now you're up in 3A. So it's just a level above. You look at this sectional and you say, okay, Heritage can be a team that can challenge them. Mississinawa, that defense is just absolutely dominant throughout the season. And so those are the teams you have to play. You're not playing a Manchester anymore. You're not playing an Eastside. All due respect, Eastside in terms of that rivalry was nice, but you're a level up a little bit, okay, in 3A. So this is by no means a guarantee for Bishop Luers. The schedule sets up for them well to get to the final. Heritage, Mississinawa, Oak Hill, they get to beat up all each other on the lower half of the bracket. But whoever comes out of that has a really good chance against Bishop Luers. But if anything, the next couple of weeks, you should be able to see Luers get some sort of momentum. But man, it just almost feels like you can see what Bishop Dwenger is going to be next year, maybe, you know? And that's not to take anything away from the seniors of this year or anything, but you're like, I see pieces. They're just not ready yet. They're not in the right spots, but give it time. I just feel like next year it's going to be a vintage Bishop Luers team.
I want to say I know Heritage comes in 8-1 and Delta's 4-5, but I think that's a sneaky tough game. Like if you're Heritage, you don't want to overlook Delta. One, they've got the 6'6" defensive end pass rusher Landon Brooks, who's going to Purdue for Delta. That'll be the best defensive player that they've gone against this year. And I know Charlie Riddle's a stud on the offensive line, but that's going to be the best defensive player they face all season long, and he can create some havoc if he's in the offensive backfield. Number two, Delta plays a heck of a schedule. I mean, they lost to New Pal. They lost badly, but they lost to New Pal last week. That is no pushover. So 4-5, not all 4-5s are created equal. I'd hate to see for Jeremy Hullinger's team to overlook Delta just based on the record because they're a solid high school football team.
No doubt that Jeremy Hollinger's telling his team the very same thing, that Delta is no joke. And that's the big thing, the big challenge going down there and having to play. And it's all about ball protection, I feel, for Heritage. And they've done a great job. What Eli Tugulis, one interception all season? I mean, he's been absolutely tremendous for Heritage. So if that can continue, Heritage protect the football and score when you have opportunities and get stops, I think you have a great chance of going down to Delaware County and getting a win. But this is by no means an easy game whatsoever.
2A sectional 35, Busco at Manchester, Adams Central Bluffton, East Side Whitco, Prairie Heights, Central Noble. That Busco Manchester game is interesting. Manchester's got a decent record, and Busco, we know, won the NECC small division, but since then, they've had to play some NECC big division teams the last couple of weeks, but it certainly doesn't help your confidence. So right. They've taken a couple L's, but they've also been one of the bigger surprises of the season. How do they make sure that they get their groove back and are ready to hit, this Manchester team when they go on the road this coming Friday?
I think the message from Coach Sade is the exact same message he gave his team when they were 0-3 to start the season, is we still have goals in front of us that we can accomplish. We need to have short memories and work forward, and that's what they were able to do in the bulk of the NECC season. They win the small division. They end Eastside's reign of 5 years on that side, and they're able to really achieve one of their goals. Now they can look at it and say, okay, we took a couple L's. Now we're back in our class in 2A, and where we can refocus, similar to what you were in the small division of the NECC. So they bounced back once from a slow start. They're almost in the same position with a couple game losing streak. The message from Coach Sade is going to be the same. Those games are over. We learned, we took our lumps. Now we're with like-sized schools, and we need to get back to what we do best. So Westonot and that group should be back in terms of focused, and they are going to have to be, because Manchester is a pretty solid football team. And this is most years to look at Manchester as maybe kind of a pushover, but I don't think they are this year.
Yeah, when you take a look at Adams Central Bluffton round 2, we saw them play in week 8, 49-24 in a game that Adams Central fairly well controlled, especially in the trenches. When you take a look at this second matchup between them this season, I was a little surprised at the Franklin County Bluffton score last week, especially from the fact that Bluffton stumbled in the end at home. That was not the way to close out the game that you like if you're Coach Kunkel and company. How do these guys pull themselves up off the mat and try to take down an Adams Central team? I mean, it's going to be at Bluffton as opposed to the game in week 8, so there's that. But how do these guys make sure that they're ready and just mentally prepared to play the biggest game of the season against the best opponent they've seen all season?
It's a tough ask, especially when you're going up against Adams Central and a team you've already played once, and they handled you easily. And it's even more of a difficult challenge when you look at just how young Bluffton is. Still, just a couple seniors that get playing time on that team. And so, where's the mindset of those underclassmen? Are they already checked out and saying, "Oh, we got to play Adams Central again"? We're just going to looking already ahead to next year. We're going to go out and take our lumps, or is there urgency? Is they're looking at last week's loss and don't get Coach Kunkel started on the one of the last plays of the game where seemingly Bluffton scored and it was waved off due to an offensive penalty that he didn't agree with in the end zone. And are they going to use that as fuel, or are they going to use that as, well, we already lost week 9. Now we have to play Adams Central again. Let's go out there and play the string and get done, and let's prepare for 2025. It's all about mentally where this team is at, and then how they really use that motivation, if they do have some, to try to slow down that running game. If you can't stop Adams Central on the ground, you have no chance to beat them. And that's why Adams Central beat them the first time, and that's what they're going to try to do again on Friday.
All right, so Adams Central's up to 2A this year. If you take, for 1A, I'm just going to throw this completely out there. We've got sectional 43 and sectional 44 with local teams. Is there a team from our area that you could see making a run, and why is it South Adams? Because I don't see anybody else.
No, I mean Blackhawk Christian Fremont is not
had moments. I mean, they hammered Blackhawk last week. Carmine Moreno's a pretty good player, so I could see them, making a little bit of a run. But South Adams has to be the team, right? From Northeast Indiana, you say someone's going to do something in 1A. It's probably going to be those guys.
Yeah, and talking to Coach Mosier before we started recording, and he was looking at it and say, "Hey, we're second in the Sagarin ratings in this section. I mean, it doesn't mean everything, but it kind of shows you where we're at in relation to these schools." Madison Grant is the clear-cut favorite in that sectional. They were undefeated until losing to Mississinawa last week in a battle of undefeateds down in Grant County, and so he feels that they could contend. The draw makes sense for them as well. So if they can get some momentum and get a couple wins under their belt and playing with house money, because I don't think anybody really expects much out of South Adams, even in this sectional. So if they can get a couple wins, get to that final, you never know. It's a team that's faced its fair share of adversity. South Adams had lost some players early on in the season that were big deals for this team, and they've kind of just been slugging it out since. Uncharacteristic under 500 season in the ACAC. So it's been a disappointing regular season, but can Coach Mosier and the Starfires turn it into a profitable sectional? They have a good draw, and if they can get some momentum, they have a shot.
I think 1A, I think kind of like small country schools that just run the football. And the one thing that gives South Adams an advantage, and we've seen it with Webo in 2A in years past, where Eastbrook would make the state championship or make a big run, and they really didn't throw the ball or see someone that threw the football. And that was a problem in the state championship games. Is just they didn't defend teams all season long that could throw like that. With McCain, he's got like 40 plus receptions, 600, 700 yards. I mean, Titus Lehman's done a nice job at the quarterback position. Ramirez seems to be getting better week to week. Like, they are different than a lot of the teams that the 1A people in their sectional have played against this year. They're just, It's a whole different dynamic. And even though it struggled a little bit in the ACAC offensively, the Starfires this year, the ACAC is like better top to bottom than it's been in a while. So it's kind of like Concordia in the SAC. Getting beat up by some of those teams benefits you in the long run when you go play 1A in the playoffs.
Yeah, you don't have to deal with Adams Central, which I think is the biggest thing, right? In your sectional. So you're familiar with Monroe Central. You have history with them in that sectional. Otherwise, you're playing a lot of teams that, you aren't familiar with, but aren't familiar with you either. Yeah, you exchange film, but you're not lining up against these teams like Hagerstown and Tri and Union City in the regular season. So can they keep up with maybe some of your athletes? And it's a good point. Maybe South Adams comes out and just says, we're going to go vertical from the jump and see if we can beat these teams downfield and get a couple scores and then get them back on their heels. So, I think you're going to keep an eye on South Adams. Like I said, Sagarin ratings isn't everything, but just below Madison Grant in this sectional is South Adams. So Jeff Sagarin feels good about the Starfires. Why shouldn't we?
We should. We should. Final question. What are you looking forward to most this week? I mean, it's always exciting when playoffs get here. It's weird when you don't have 5A and 6A to a certain degree because you gear up. You're used to it all season long, those big school matchups. But what are you most looking forward to here in week 10 as we enter the postseason?
Well, I'm excited about this week because I'm really excited about particularly 2A through 4A. And that's no disrespect to 5A and 6A that'll get started next week. But I feel like we're looking this week, we're getting the classes started that we feel the best to get teams down to the state championship this year. You look at Adams Central in 2A, Garrett in 3A, any of four teams or five teams in 4A, right, across two sectionals. So you really look at these three classes as this is where we feel the best opportunity to teams make a deep run and potentially get down to Indianapolis on Thanksgiving weekend. So let's get it started. And especially in 4A, we just jump right into the deep end with Columbia City and Bishop Dwenger.
Good deal. All right. We appreciate the insight, Justin. We will see you next week when we get some 5A and 6A mixed in as we get to the sectional semifinals. For Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you next Monday on Inside the Zone.